Hello. I just want to make sure everybody out there can hear me, and I'll give another 20 or 30 seconds here to make sure that if anybody is still planning to jump on, that they're able to. Then we'll get started. I see there's still just a couple people that have joined here in the last few seconds, so wait just a few more and then we'll get going. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining me this afternoon. My name is Josh Clark, and I am a renewable energy consultant with Simpleray. And I want to take a little bit of time today to talk to you about the basics of how solar works. A little bit on the technical side and a little bit on how it works on the savings side. So as I go through, you've probably noticed there is a chat window and the ability to ask questions. So some of the questions can be answered kind of on the fly by some other folks, and then at the very end, we'll have some time to go over more questions as well. So one of the things we'll talk about here are just a very in-depth, if you will, overview of how solar actually works from a technical standpoint. And we'll explain how sunlight works with the cells and panels, just like this infographic here shows. So some of the terms that you have probably heard when discussing solar with people or looking on the internet or anything are the solar cells and solar modules. So the module, that is another word for the panel, the more commonly used term being panel. And a solar module is made up of many solar cells. Then, to go a little further, numerous solar modules then make up your entire solar array. Here we see one mounted on the ground. We, of course, do them on the ground as well as on the roof. Another technical term you've probably heard before is PV when you're talking about solar PV or photovoltaics. Photo meaning light, volt meaning electric potential. So whenever you hear anyone talk about a PV array or a PV system, they are referring to photovoltaics. Photovoltaic solar cells are made from layers of crystalline silicone covered with a very hard protective layer of non-reflective glass. I want to stress a little bit on just how hard and durable that protective layer of glass is. I'm sure at least some of you have probably seen some articles and things on the news recently with the hurricanes that have been happening in the Southeast, just how really surprisingly well some large solar installations in the Southeast have withstood those hurricanes. So very durable products for sure. So the cells themselves, the PV cells, they are made up of two layers of silicone that are treated to let electricity flow through them when exposed to sunlight. One layer is positively charged and the other is negatively charged. As photons enter the layers, they give up their energy to the atoms in the silicone in the form of electrons. When photons hit the layers of silicone, electrons pass through the junction between the positive and negative layers, generating electric current. And the electric current that's generated there at the cell and panel level is DC current, so direct current. And in most systems, there are some off-grid systems that remain DC, but in a grid-tied system, there will be an inverter or many inverters that then transfer or convert that DC electricity to AC electricity that your home or business, what have you, is actually going to consume. So just a brief overview of what we talked about so far. The solar array is composed of many solar modules. Those modules are composed of solar cells. When sunlight hits the solar cells, they convert the sunlight into electricity. This electricity is used to power your home, business, or any property that you have an array attached to. The sun equals power. The panels work anytime there is sun in the sky. This does also include cloudy days. That's a question we get rather frequently is, well, the sun's not always shining. Sometimes it's cloudy. Is my system still going to save me any money or produce any power when it's cloudy out? The answer is yes. Just because there is cloud cover does not mean that there is not solar energy being transmitted and then your panels using those to produce electricity. Factually, that they will be less efficient and you will produce less power when there is cloud cover, but you will still be producing power. What about at night? This is a question that we get pretty frequently as well. There isn't any sunlight available at night, so therefore your solar panels, cells, are not producing electricity at night. However, that doesn't mean that you can't benefit from solar power even though you're still using electricity when the sun is down. And the way that you're still able to benefit from having a solar array, even though you still use electricity at night, is via net metering. And we'll get into that a little deeper next. You can see this little graphic here kind of explaining what happens when the sun is out. You'll see during the array, your solar array, during the day, your solar array produces electricity. You see we've got the line there running to the home and then another line running to what's meant to represent the utility grid. Your home uses what it needs of the electricity that you're generating in the moment, and the excess energy is transferred back to the utility grid where you are credited for that electricity that you put back onto the grid. Now, when the sun goes down, your array is not producing electricity, but you are able to pull against those credits that you've earned during the daytime when you may have been overproducing electricity. So yes, you are pulling electricity off of the grid at night when your array is not producing. But if you are able to take advantage of net metering based on what utility you are connected to, even though you are using electricity that you're pulling off the grid, you may not actually be paying for it. So therefore, your solar array, even at night, has still produced a benefit to you. So a little more about how net metering can help you offset your energy bill. If you are on a net metered utility, and unfortunately this is not, we don't have enough time to go through all of the utilities in the areas that we do business with throughout Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, et cetera. There are literally hundreds, and there are many, many different net metering policies between all those utilities. So we can't get into each individual one here, but if you are on a utility that does offer net metering, we're going to design your system so that it will produce enough power that you will build enough credits to offset essentially whatever your annual electric costs will be. The idea here is that we can earn enough credits through net metering that you won't actually end up paying for electricity on an annual basis, give or take, a small amount here and there. And of course, there are some fixed fees as far as meter fees and access charges and things like that that your solar array isn't going to be able to reduce. And just as I touched on before, net metering is not available everywhere on every utility. Many, many utilities, all with varying policies. Here in Iowa, the investor-owned utilities, publicly traded utilities like Alliant and Mid-American, for instance, they are required to net meter here in Iowa. That again, does not mean that folks on some municipal utilities or rural electric co-ops are going to be able to take advantage of net metering, but some of those utilities do offer net metering. So that's something that, as your interest grows and you want to speak to one of our renewable energy consultants about a potential project, we can go into those details with you at that time and start looking specifically at what policies you'll be able to take advantage of on your utility. So what about going off grid? Another question we get pretty frequently, and off grid means exactly what it sounds like it means, is you are no longer connected to the utility grid. So what that means is there's no energy when your array is not producing and no net metering to make up for that. The use of batteries can make going off the grid work, but the total project cost can increase very significantly. There's a couple ways to look at going off grid. One is a person might say, I want to have no changes in my day-to-day life, but I want to go off the grid. In that case, to make that happen, a substantial solar array and a substantial battery storage system will have to be installed. On the other hand, some people are adamant about going off the grid, and they're willing to make some lifestyle changes to make that possible with a smaller and less costly system. So going off grid is possible. It is, you just have to make sure that that's really what you want to do from a lifestyle standpoint or a spending standpoint. But those are all questions that we can help you work through. So we'll take a minute to review again what we've talked about so far. So the solar modules are producing electricity from sunlight. The extra energy produced can be credited if you are on a utility that allows that. If you need more energy than you're producing at any given time, you can pull against those credits that you've banked. And throughout the year, our design goal is to make your energy credits and debits roughly even out throughout the end of the year, so that you're not left with an electric bill maybe in the last month or two of the year, and at the end of the year you haven't earned so many credits that they go to waste at the end of the year. So we've talked a little bit about how a system works. Now we can go over some of the benefits of installing such a system. So one benefit that we talk about very frequently and has really been a great driver in growing the industry is the federal tax credit. The federal tax credit right now is worth 30% of the total solar array cost with no cap. So if you end up spending $100,000 to install solar, you have then earned $30,000 in federal tax credits. And one thing we always want to make sure we clarify is this is a tax credit, not a deduction. So it's not reducing your taxable income. It is a credit towards what you end up owing in taxes. So for instance, if at the end of the year, you talk to your CPA and it turns out you're going to have to write a check to the federal government for $10,000, but you have purchased solar in that year and you have a $10,000 federal tax credit, that would cancel out your tax liability and you would owe nothing in that situation. The credits will begin to sunset next year, and we've got a table here that kind of explains that further. So this year, 2018, and next year, 2019, the credit remains at 30%. In 2020, that federal tax credit will drop to 26%. In 2021, it's going to fall to 22%. And then in 2022, we'll see that federal tax credit drop to 10%. And the stated plan, anyway, is that 10% federal tax credit will continue on indefinitely. So if you're thinking about solar and have been thinking about solar, there's never really been a better time to get serious about thinking solar. Because as you can see here, the amount of benefit from installing solar is going to start to fall off in the relatively near future. So we'll talk a little bit about state incentives. Depending on what state you live in, there could be incentives in addition to that federal tax credit. For instance, Illinois, there's the adjustable block program. And again, I want to stress that each of these programs are detailed enough, and we don't have the ability to go into them in great detail during this webinar, but we have done some in the past that have explained these in greater detail. And of course, your renewable energy consultant that you reach out to will be able to talk in much greater detail about any of them, whatever questions you have. But essentially, the Illinois Adjustable Block Program works in that the Illinois Power Agency is going to pay you to install solar based on the size and production of your system. So it is actually a cash benefit to you to install solar. In Iowa, we have a state tax credit that applies to your state income taxes in addition to the federal tax credit. So in Iowa, the state tax credit is pegged to 50% of whatever the federal tax credit is. So currently that would mean it's a 15% tax credit. Then once that federal tax credit starts to drop off, then the Iowa tax credit will of course begin to drop off as well. So in 2020, we'll see that state tax credit go to 13%. Missouri has a solar rebate program that their publicly traded utilities, Kansas City Power and Light, Ameren, and Empire, are involved in. And that program is also along the same lines as the adjustable block program in that it is a rebate based on system size and production. And other states, we might have folks that have logged on from states outside of these three. There are other incentives in other states as well that we can dig into with you if you're interested in that. And again, you can ask in the chat if you'd like to learn more about the programs, or call or email us to learn more as well. Solar for businesses. Solar and business are a pretty natural fit, especially with the tax credits that we just talked about. So there are additional incentives for what we're considering and what the government considers commercial properties. So when we say commercial properties, that could be a farm, that could be a big manufacturing plant, it could be office buildings, it could be a home business. It's just whatever can be considered a business. So let's talk a little bit about assets versus expenses and how solar should be viewed as an asset rather than an expense. So a common business expense you could compare to is, let's say you want to lease a piece of equipment like a truck. Yes, your lease payments can be deducted from income as an expense. That truck may have a lifespan of 5 years, 15 years, not indefinite for sure. That truck is also going to require routine maintenance and repairs, so added expenses. And the truck does not directly generate value. So just looking at a typical expense, you can compare that to an investment in a solar array as an asset. You are able to claim depreciation on this asset under the accelerated maker's schedule, so 6-year depreciation. Solar arrays have a typical warranted lifespan at 25 years. In reality, you could see a typical lifespan closer to 35 or 40 years. So a much more long-term asset purchase than many that folks will look at for a business. Little to no maintenance cost on your solar array. That's not at all to say that nothing could ever go wrong and there's a guarantee that you'll never have to fix anything, but there is no actual planned routine maintenance that needs to be done at certain intervals with solar. Essentially, your panels are going to sit there and work and save money. There are incentives available in addition to the electrical savings that the panels are obviously going to provide you. And we've talked a little bit about those incentives as far as tax credits as well as the accelerated depreciation. The solar array is actually working for you once it's installed without you having to work for it, essentially. It's generating value just by virtue of being there. And we like to joke about, giving your roof a day job. So the space is just sitting there for the most part. Put it to work for you. Save some money. So another quick review is that the solar arrays convert sunlight to electricity. There are incentives available to reduce the net cost of the solar array based on tax credits and depreciation. And a solar array is an asset rather than a typical business expense. All right. Well, hopefully this has been informative for folks, and I'm very happy to open it up for questions in the chat. Feel free to go ahead and ask those, and we'll do our best to answer them. Let's see, I've got a question here. Are there financing options available, or is everything up front? That's a good question. And yes, there are financing options available. We have a variety of things that we can help you explore for different types of arrays, whether it be residential financing, a few different commercial options, or even what's called a PPA, or a power purchase agreement, where you're actually paying for the power that the array produces with someone else as the owner. So yes, there are financing options available. Let's see. How effective are panels after 40 years? Okay, so that one is, it's also a good question. Generally speaking, any panel that we're going to install, we're looking at a yearly production degradation of less than 1% per year, so close, and really closer to 0.5%. And that has been shown in many years of testing. And so what we're seeing is most panel manufacturers are offering an 80% production guarantee even at year 25. So if we move that out and do the math a little bit there, you could expect after 40 years to still be in the 65 to 70% effective range. Okay, and I've got a question here. I have a 1,500 square foot home. How much will my array cost? You know, there's actually a lot of factors that go into pricing. And what is one of the most important factors is how much you're actually paying for your electricity, more so than the actual size of the home. Because what we're going to do is try to design and size your array based on your usage. And we'll, of course, take the size of your home into account as far as roof mounting options and things like that. But the most important aspect is your electrical usage. Let's see. Just trying to keep all the questions straight. I appreciate getting all the questions, so I'll try to get to them all here. Without credits, is solar viable for nonprofits? Yes, it is. So it's a good question in that, you know, somebody looking, whether it be a church or a school, you might look at and hear all the talk about tax credits and think, well, that really doesn't apply to me, so solar probably doesn't make sense for me. And it's some of those financing options that we talked about before that make solar still viable for nonprofits and folks that aren't able to take advantage of those tax credits and the depreciation. In situations like that, someone who can, whether it be an investor or a group of investors, et cetera, someone that can take advantage of those tax benefits would in that case be the owner of the array, enter into a PPA with that nonprofit to then essentially sell them electricity that the solar array produces at a rate lower than they would buy the electricity from their utility company. So it can still work for nonprofits even without directly being able to take advantage of those tax incentives. All right, let's see. I've got, what kind of cost are we looking at? For example, a household that generally pays roughly $100 to $150 a month. Again, I'd have to say, I don't mean to deflect the question in any way, but there are an awful lot of factors that go into pricing regarding net metering policy, where the array needs to be mounted, size of your electrical service. So that's the type of a question that one of us as renewable energy consultants would be very, very happy to dig deeper in with you to get you those answers. At this point, with just that as parameters, I don't think it would be appropriate to try to just start throwing out some wild numbers in this setting. Let's see, I've got, since panels come in different wattage, what is your preferred choice and why not a larger watt panel? Okay, that's a good question. You're right, there are tons of different wattages of panels, all the way into the low 400 watt panels, and we still see quotes out there with panels, barely over 300 watts per. So there certainly are a wide range. It really, for us anyway, it really comes down to procurement as much as it does anything. We're always on the lookout, I guess, if you will, for panels that we feel provide a great mixture between quality, the bankability of the company, production, efficiency, et cetera, and ultimately and price as well. So if we look at all of those factors, and then we're able to determine what panels we're able to buy to offer customers the best total value. And I can say that we have in the very recent future been using 385 watt panels. So on the higher end of the spectrum compared to what a lot of folks out there are using. So we're fortunate in that we're able to use wonderful panels like that and still be able to offer them at what we consider a great value to our customers. And as far as why not a larger watt panel, there are some panels out there that do produce at a higher wattage than 385. In those cases, what we find is the trade-off between the added cost of those panels and the marginal added production does not make that a good value choice for the customer at this point. Let's see here. Do the panels affect the warranty on my roof? Do I need to add to my homeowner's insurance? With the warranty question, that is going to be a question for each building company, manufacturer, etc. Definitely a question you would want to dig into with the builder. Different builders are going to approach that differently. And what we find is that many builders and many roofing material manufacturers, in this day and age, it's almost impossible to completely avoid having solar on a building, just all over the world. So they've adopted certain racking practices and racking materials and so forth that they allow, and they say if you follow these guidelines and use these products, then your warranty will be intact. So that's a great question and something very well worth digging into, but there isn't a blanket answer. And as far as do I need to add to my homeowner's insurance, yes, that is absolutely recommended. What we find oftentimes is, especially with homeowners, there are some folks that they have enough coverage as is with their current policy that adding the solar array, the value then does not push them above their current coverage level. So they may not even end up paying anymore. But absolutely, you want to have that discussion with your insurance agent, because even if you don't end up changing your policy, the fact that now they're there, the insurance company needs to know that in case there ever is a claim, that you can make sure that you're covered and protected correctly. See, do you see individuals going with a combination of wind and solar? We live in a subdivision in the middle of a cornfield, and every day there's a breeze. That's a good question. And I would have to say it's possible. I'm not so sure that we have ever worked on a project where we incorporated both. And it's been a number of years since we've worked on any wind projects, period. And we find that with the additional maintenance cost involved in keeping a wind turbine up and running and producing, they're really not nearly as cost effective as what solar is right now. Especially, when you take into account the very consistent production and very minimal maintenance costs. Let's see. I think I've got the questions answered, or at least the ones that I'm seeing here. So I appreciate everyone who did ask a question. All really good questions. So hopefully that I was able to give you some good answers as well. All right. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any. So. Okay, I'm seeing the questions, and I think we're all set. So thanks very much for everybody that did log on today. I appreciate it, and hopefully it was useful for you. Thanks.